Have a look at this. It's a medal. The swastika is very clear on it, so we can see that this is a Nazi medal. We might be able to see the engraving on the back. It says 1938. So this medal was actually awarded before the Second World War. So who was it for? Nazi soldiers? Well, possibly, but this is a medal from before World War II. Who else could it be for? And why might it be awarded? For bravery or for something else? Well, the truth is that this might surprise you. This is the Cross of German Motherhood. It was awarded to German mothers who had lots of children, and you could get various degrees of the award from bronze up to gold. Hitler compared the experience of childbirth to that of a soldier in war. He saw that the role of women was to have lots of children, and that was their duty to making Germany great. But he also recognised that there were dangers in this at the time, and so a woman having children was seen as a sacrifice, something worthy of being rewarded with a medal, much as you might reward a soldier for their bravery. The way that the Nazis twisted the role of women in the 1930s and into the 1940s is fascinating, but a worrying warning of what can happen when sexism takes over the way a country is run. Today's online lesson has the following title: What was it like to be a Nazi woman? The aims are to know what the Nazis believed the role of women was, to explain how Nazi ideas affected women, and to evaluate the extent to which women's lives were affected by Nazi rule. If you're a GCSE student, this can be considered a basic introductory revision lesson. For Key Stage 3 students, this is a more in-depth look at the role of women in Nazi Germany to assist you in your studies. Pause the video while you note down the title. Okay, we're going to have a look at some sources first of all to try and get an idea as to how the Nazis viewed women in society. Do now. What you're going to do is to make one inference about how the Nazis viewed women from each of the posters that I'm going to show you. We'll have a look at an example first, and then you can have a go yourself. I can infer that a detail in the source that tells me this is. Now remember, an inference is where you're taking information from a source that isn't immediately obvious. So let's have a look at this one here. Think about what the picture might mean. It doesn't really matter if you can't read the German text. Have a look for clues in the picture. We'll also have a look at these posters too. Firstly, let's have a look at the woman holding up the fabric and the shoe. Here's an introductory answer that I've prepared for you. I can infer that women were expected to manage their households as housewives. A detail in the source that tells me this is that women are being encouraged to recycle old clothes and shoes. In fact, I can now tell you that the text at the top basically means out with old fabric and shoes. Yourself. Make one inference about how the Nazis viewed women from each poster. Here's the first one again, out with old fabric and shoes. And the next, it shows a woman ploughing with a man fighting in the background. Next, it shows a very stereotypical Nazi Aryan couple. If you're unfamiliar with the term Aryan, we're going to study it later, so don't worry too much. And lastly, a breastfeeding mother. These are just your initial thoughts, so if you can't put much detail into it at the moment, it doesn't really matter. These are inferences. Try and get some ideas that go a little bit beyond the obvious and note down what detail from the source maybe gives you this clue. Pause the video while you complete that. It should take you around 10 minutes to do. Okay, hopefully you got some basic introductory ideas about what the Nazis thought of women. However, we're going to look at the role of women in a more deep sense as we go through this lesson, and you'll be able to see whether any of your ideas were correct or whether you were incorrect. The role of women in Nazi Germany. Here are some beliefs that the Nazis had about women in society. Women were encouraged or forced to leave their jobs. For example, all women doctors were sacked. Women should be good housewives. They should use leftovers. Prepare an Eintopf or one-pot meal. This is where leftovers from other meals during the week would be put into a big stew or pot and served up again. They were expected to be good mothers, healthy, and they promoted the traditional family values such as marriage and only having children within marriage. They were expected to be dressed in traditional and modest German clothes. They were expected to bring up children to worship the Führer, or Hitler, and to join the Hitler Youth, which is like the Scouts for Nazis. Loans were offered to couples to encourage them to get married. The more children they would have, the less they were encouraged to pay back. If you had 4 or more children, you didn't have to pay anything back at all. That was quite an incentive to get married and have lots of children. Women could win medals for having lots of children, such as the Honour Cross of German mothers, like we saw at the start. But there was one condition. The woman had to leave their job to access the loans and these medals. Without that, she couldn't earn. Here's your task then. Create a mind map with the following sections: work and employment, managing the home, raising children. Record these bullet points into the correct sections. You can abbreviate them slightly if you need to. As an extension, are there any sections or facts that are linked? Draw arrows between them and explain those links. How are they related? Thirdly, which section is most important to the Nazis, do you think? Explain your choice using point, example, explain. I've included a writing frame here to help you should you need it. Okay, this will probably take you between 15 and 20 minutes, so you can pause the video now and complete the task. Well, clearly all of these sections were important to the Nazis, but as we proceed through the lessons, you may well change your opinion as to which was most important. That's no problem. As you get more information, you can formulate your opinions more accurately. Kinder, Kutscher, Kirche. I apologise for my poor German pronunciation. However, this is a very important idea in Nazi Germany. The Nazis believed in the traditional and sexist idea of the 3 Ks. Kinder, Kutscher and Kirche. Firstly, Kinder, not kinder as it looks like in English. Kinder means children. Women had a responsibility to have and raise children. The more the merrier. Kutscher, kitchen. Women had to be housewives, keeping the home clean and providing meals. Kirche, church. Women were expected to ensure their children were Christians and went to church. The Nazis actually weren't that keen on the church. They preferred people to worship them. However, they realised that the Germans were a deeply Christian people and it would be difficult to change their minds on this. So the Nazis extended this idea to ensuring that children worshipped Hitler too. Your task then. Record these definitions for Kinder, Kutscher and Kirche. Use your information from the last task. Explain how Nazi ideas aimed to encourage women to behave in a way that reflected each of the 3 Ks. Explain this using peel. This is like point, example, explain, but you make a final link back to the overall theme. Here's a writing frame to help you. It'll take you about 10 to 15 minutes to complete this task, so pause the video now while you complete that. Let's have a look at an example answer. You can always try and improve your answer if it's not quite up to scratch. The Nazis believed in the idea of Kinder. An example of what the Nazis expected of women is that they would have lots of children. The effect of this was that women were encouraged to leave their jobs to concentrate on being mothers. This related to the idea of Kinder because the Nazis wanted women to adopt a traditional role as mothers. But it wasn't always like that. Let's consider what women's lives were like before the Nazis took power and after. Before the Nazis took power in 1933, women in Germany had experienced some increases in their personal freedom and rights, though we should not consider them to have gained full equality with men. Women were more likely to have jobs and money of their own at this time. This meant that women didn't necessarily marry quite so young because they were able to provide for themselves. This was partially brought about by the number of women who entered the workplace during World War I and quite fancied staying on in jobs of their own and enjoyed the independence that this offered. Also, women had equal voting rights with men. This was enshrined in the German Weimar Constitution, which was passed in 1919. Women had greater freedom to dress how they liked and express themselves through art and fashion. Here's an example of this. Source A shows German women performing in a cabaret show in Berlin in the 1920s. They wear male-inspired costumes with top hats and waistcoats. This would have been considered quite racy at the time, and maybe even a little bit controversial, but it was a way of showing that they were challenging the traditionally accepted views of women and how they should dress modestly. Those skirts, for example, would have been incredibly short by the standards of the time. I would add as well that these women are showing an increase in the amount of American culture that was being introduced into Weimar Germany in the 1920s. Jazz and cabaret dancing were incredibly popular recreations in Weimar Germany. Your tasks then. Firstly, summarise in a short paragraph what new rights and freedoms women had gained in the 1920s. Secondly, study source A. In what ways does this source show some of the ways that women had gained more freedoms in the 1920s? Again, look back at the bullet points to remind yourself what these were. And thirdly, as an extension, what might the Nazi attitude be towards these women? This will take you about 10 minutes to do, so pause the video now. So what did we think? Well, hopefully we've identified from source A that these women are showing some of that new fashion and artistic freedom that had been introduced in Weimar Germany. You probably have realised, though, that the Nazis would take a pretty dim view of this. In fact, they wanted women to lose many of these new rights and freedoms and to return to a, shall we say, more sexist and old-fashioned, traditional perhaps, culture of women in Germany. We're going to compare source A to a second source in a moment. Here's source A again, and now source B. Source B is a Nazi propaganda poster from the 1930s. The heading reads, "The Nazis are securing the people's community or society." Well, that's the best sort of definition I can give to the word Volksgemeinschaft, which is a German word which doesn't truly have an English translation. But a pretty close one is this idea that there is a people's community which everyone contributes to for the good of the whole country. Of course, that was only under Nazi rules. Look at that eagle in the background. The eagle had long been a traditional symbol of the strength of Germany and a national symbol. And to a certain extent, it remains that today in certain flags. Look how the wings are protecting the family. What might this represent? Some tasks then. Firstly, study both sources. Take some time to do this. How is the woman in source B shown differently to the women in source A? Look for clues about who she is with. Look for also clues about how she is dressed, and consider some of your work from earlier. Secondly, review your earlier work. What Nazi ideas are represented in source B? Remember, you'll need to infer and look for clues. Go beyond the obvious. What are the meanings, not just what does it show? And thirdly, as an extension, source B refers to a people's community. What do you think the Nazis wanted this to be like? Again, this should take you about 10 minutes, answering in full sentences, so pause the video now while you complete that. Hopefully we have identified that the woman in source B is shown in a much more modest and traditional female costume. Not only that she's surrounded by a traditional family. Lots of little blonde children, and a protective husband with his arm around her. Far from the independent, more racy women that you see in source A. So what Nazi ideas are represented here? Well, we've got the idea that women were expected to be good mothers. We've got the idea that they were expected to get married and have traditional families. Basically, this in some ways sums up the idea of Kinder, Küche and Kirche. Children, kitchen, church. And what about this people's community? Well, really it's the idea that the Nazis preferred people, these so-called Aryans, who were considered by the Nazis to be racially superior to other groups, should work towards the better good of the rest of the country, with the country looking after them. Of course, this is a very strange form of looking after them, because the racist and persecuting ideas of the Nazis very often did the exact opposite, of course, as we're going to see. On the other hand, the Nazis had an incredibly racist ideology. They believed that Aryan people, this is often simplified as being white people with blonde hair and blue eyes, though actually the reality was rather more complex than this, were better than other races. In particular, the Nazis had a hatred for the Jews, but actually other races were hated by the Nazis too. Not all German women were encouraged to have children. In fact, for some, the exact opposite was true. Consider these details. Firstly, laws were passed in 1935 that banned marriages and even relationships between German and non-German people. What they really meant by this was between Jewish people and non-Jewish people. People in mixed heritage or multiracial couples were fined, imprisoned and persecuted. The word persecuted meant that they were treated really unfairly and people were encouraged to kind of pick on them within society and treat them horribly. Families with a history of genetic or hereditary illness were told not to have children. The Nazis believed that such people weakened the country as a whole, which is an incredibly heartless way to look at it. The same applied to disabled people. Some of these people were even encouraged to be sterilised so that they could never have children. Racist and anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish propaganda was produced to discourage women from being friends with Jewish men. This is one particularly troubling example. It's taken from a children's book, believe it or not, called The Giftpilz, or The Toadstool. In it, Jews are shown as being ugly and horrible. These are racist depictions and they are not true at all. However, this is the sort of thing that German children were being given to kind of drum into them the idea that the Jews were in some way evil. The woman is shown walking away from the Jewish man who is greeting her and basically ignoring him. This was how German children were being encouraged to behave as adults. A very troubling thing indeed. Some tasks then. Note down what groups of women were persecuted or treated badly by the Nazis. And secondly, explain why these rules fit into the racist ideas that the Nazis had, that so-called Aryan people were better than other races. Pause the video while you complete those tasks. These racist ideas are further underlined by this piece of propaganda which was produced for young German women. Look at these so-called rules that German women were expected to live by. They're not only sexist, but they're also very racist too, and they're drumming into women this idea that they had to choose their partners on the basis of their race and their heritage, rather than whether they really loved them. Remember, you are a German. If you are healthy, do not stay single. The implication being that if they were healthy, they were going to have lots of healthy children. Keep your body pure. Keep your mind and spirit pure. Marry only for love. Well, whether we really believe that the Nazis thought that or not, I'll leave up to you. As a German, choose only a husband of the same blood. That meant of the same race. In choosing a husband, ask about his forebears or his ancestors. Health is essential to beauty. Don't look for a playmate, but for a companion. And you should want to have as many children as possible. Quite clearly here, this is fitting into the idea that the Nazis wanted women to have as many children as possible so that the Aryan race could spread around the globe and dominate. Racist ideas that thankfully never came true. Finally, how did the Nazis get women to adopt their ideas? Well, this might be summed up as being a bit like the carrot versus the stick. One way of encouraging people to act in a certain way is to punish them, the so-called stick. Imagine the donkey being hit with a stick. Poor old donkey. Well, he's going to move forward. On the other hand, there's the carrot. You can encourage people to act in the right way with, or your preferred way, with a reward. So in the picture, the donkey is attracted towards the carrot and will move forward to try and get it. So do you get people to do what you want by rewarding them for acting in a certain way, or do you punish them if they don't act in the way that you want? This was very much the Nazi approach. Review your work for this lesson. Give at least one way that women might be rewarded for following Nazi ideas. There's certainly more than one example of this, so if you can give more than one example, do so. Then give at least one way that women might be punished for going against Nazi ideas. Thirdly, give your overall opinion. I would hope that we all agree that these sexist and racist ideas are dreadful. So we're not going to give an opinion like that. We're going to give an opinion like this instead. Overall, the main way that the Nazis changed women's lives was, and then give your opinion, what was the main way that they changed their lives? And then explain why that was the most important way that the Nazis changed women's lives. Pause the video while you complete that. I hope that this short video has given you a basic introduction to the role of women in Nazi Germany. If you're revising from it, I hope that that's been useful, or if you've been treating this as a full lesson, go back and make sure that you understand the main concepts and make sure that you have written up your answers as fully as possible. You can always replay parts of this video to try and get a better idea of what you were supposed to be doing. I hope that was useful. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and if you did, remember you can subscribe to the channel to get more content like this. Thanks very much, and goodbye.